Well, just to introduce myself, I'm Cornelia Flora. I'm a development sociologist. I live in an agricultural wasteland called Iowa, where you can't drink the water and the air isn't very good if you breathe deeply, but we have high productivity of a few crops. Okay, so I'm looking at moving towards sustainable agriculture using a community capitals framework, because as we have, a number of the speakers have noted, there are people involved in this whole notion of a transition. So, okay, red button, green button, what do I press? Green button.
Press down.
Pardon? Point down?
Press down.
I'm pressing.
No, wrong one.
Oh, this green button with the arrow on it. Sorry. Okay, capital are resources invested to create new resources over a long time horizon. And this is not just for me to have a chance to show you pictures of my granddaughters, but to point out the long time horizon that is involved. Short-term investments are called speculation. And those are the kind of investments, short-termism is what we tend to favor in this current society. That, what was the government's first response to the coronavirus? Lower interest rates. And the stock market popped up for a moment or two and is now dropping again. That's short-termism. We're looking for this long time horizon, which again is countercultural at this point. We do this by looking at systems. And what I'm looking at as a development sociologist is economic security, social well-being, and healthy ecosystems. Notice I did not have economic growth, because what we have seen is highly correlated with economic growth, certainly in the last century and into this century, is increasing inequality. So economic security for all is the goal. Social well-being, that everyone is respected, everyone has a voice, everyone is included. And obviously a healthy ecosystem. That is absolutely critical. So we start this out from our systems approach looking at natural capital, which is really, really important. It places both the limits and the possibilities for human activity. And what we have been seeing here is that we have put on ourselves some artificial limits in terms of what we can do. So we have to open new land to increase productivity, whereas we could do more sustainable intensification of existing land, put some of this back into wetlands and forests, or Iowa was once a oak savanna with grazers and controlled by fire, and it also had lots of wetlands for a whole series of wildlife as well. We have managed to drain it. We're probably one of the most altered landscapes in the country. And that has put other strains on our system. Second is cultural capital. This is more important than we realize, I think. This cultural capital is how the seen is connected to what we don't see. An example of this, I did my dissertation research in Colombia. I was looking at Pentecostals. I was saying, how do people get organized? And I was going around interviewing priests and community leaders in the rural Cauca Valley, and my taxi driver said, do you believe in witches? Or sorry, do you believe in the devil? And I said, well, no. He said, well, if there is no devil, how can there be witches? And that absolutely had me. I could not answer that logic, because what was seen and the unseen was totally different from me than for my very nice taxi driver. Cultural capital determines what we think is possible. An example of this is I was talking to some farmers in Iowa soon after I got there and said, why are you growing this corn and soybeans? He said, well, that's all we can grow. I said, what? I'm from California, and Iowa has a good rainfall regime for growing. In California, it only rains in the winter when nothing grows. And so we irrigate in the summer. But Iowa, mostly it rains in the growing season. which is really good. So you have the best, it used to have the best soils, all this lush soil, and all you can grow is corn and soybeans. Well, that's all the government pays us to grow. So where are our constraints? Are they from our natural capital, or are they from our political capital? So cultural capital also determines sort of what we value, and that's very important as well. Human capital, that's the knowledge and abilities of each individual. And one of the issues, and I think it was raised a number of times, that when we go into developing countries and we assume that we come with all the knowledge that is needed to fix the environment, to help them produce food, we're often ignoring the important things they are doing. I'm going to give you an example of how we're working with human capital in a Sustainable Intensification Innovation Lab based at Kansas State University. This is a mixed crop and livestock system. It involves, I'm looking particularly at Burkina Faso and Senegal. There are a number of nitrogen-fixing trees and bushes on the landscape. Were you to mechanize with gasoline engines, which would increase the carbon footprint and cause you to import a lot of those inputs, you would have to take out those trees and bushes. However, animal traction allows you to go around them quite easily. So this project, working with the local blacksmiths who provide most of the agricultural equipment, made agronomic harnesses for the donkeys, which are used by women and children, and the cows, which are used by men to plow. So you get instead of putting the yoke across the back, or across the necks, which is very inefficient in terms of using your animal traction, you put it where their muscles are and where you pull, so they can pull more easily. Then the crop they grow, it's an integrated system, grow millet. So we introduce zinc into dual-purpose millet, and working with the blacksmiths, you could cut it up and ensilage it. School children love doing that. So now suddenly you feed that to your animals in the hungry season when they don't have much to eat, but right before you plant, and you have a whole lot more efficient planting. Then with the blacksmith, a way to rip the soil, insert a seed with a little bit of either fertilizer or dung, and then cover it up. So you're not going to waste a lot of that fertilizer, and the birds aren't going to eat your seed. These kinds of things made what they were already doing even more efficient, and encouraging intercropping, both peanuts, which was a traditional crop, and cowpeas, which is also a way to not be hungry, based on that knowledge. Social capital is the interaction among individuals, it's groups. I see my time's short. Political capital. This perhaps is the most important thing. More important than financial capital, which we tend to favor, which comes less. What is profitable is very much determined by policies. And I think one of the things that many of you have mentioned is the need for serious policy change. What have we done with we're in huge insecurity for production. We don't know what the climate's going to be. We don't know what prices are going to be. We don't know if we're going to have markets. Well, so we lost a bunch of markets that we were counting on through tariffs. And so we gave money to people who were presumably producing that, although most of it went to Smithfield in China and JBS in Brazil. But we gave all these awards to people who presumably lost money from the tariffs, which does encourage people to do exactly what they've always done, not respond to say, let's have shorter and more complex value chains within our country, because we don't reward that. We are a culture based on exports. When we were first settled from England, we grew cotton. We imported the labor from Africa to produce that cotton, and we exported it to the cotton mills in Great Britain. So that this notion of our export-based agriculture really has to be rethought, because the amount, and we've mentioned a bit, the carbon footprint of all that transportation is huge. How much easier it would be if we could do this more locally. And more diverse cropping systems would also be helpful. Now, I belong to a CSA in Iowa. We have pretty crummy winters, but if you're using high tunnels, you can produce all sorts of vegetables during the winter. And that's a much shorter value chain with a whole lot more nutritional benefit. And so finally we get to build capital. And again, we have built our infrastructure based on industrial agriculture. So any change of farming system is going to result in what we call stranded assets, as we're seeing now going on with coal plants and coal mining. Because as technology changes, you've got the old technology and what's going to happen to it. So we need policies that address all these implications of what impacts what we do in agriculture, as well as people organize to understand why it's needed. We have, and probably cultural capital would be the most important thing to say change is possible. We have research at Iowa State University that shows how intercropping, how cover crops can really do a couple of things. It increases, short-term what people like to measure is actually your soil quality more than you, it's really hard to measure your carbon sequestration, but you can see your soil getting better. You have much better drainage when you do these things. So we have to work on the cultural capital to say change is possible and desirable. So at any rate, that's end of my time. Sorry.
Thank you, Cornelia.
Bye, everyone.